Another huge conflict of interest scandal brewing in Brussels after former European Commission President José Manuel Barroso's acceptance of a Brexit negotiator job for the bank Goldman Sachs. New Bahamas leaks revelations show that the commissioner, who had been in charge of competition during her tenure, who had pushed for a liberalization of the energy sector, also secretly chaired a Bahamas-based firm that invested in, you guessed it, energy. Julia Kim has more.
Embarrassment for the European Union as leaked documents reveal that one of its former commissioners could have breached EU rules. Neelie Kroes failed to declare her directorship of Mint Holdings Limited, an offshore firm in the Bahamas, while working for the Commission. EU commissioners are forbidden from taking on any professional roles while in office.
The Commission was not informed about this. Mrs. Kroes has now told us, and the President is now seeking clarification from her. Once all facts are on the table, the Commission will decide on the next steps and actions.
The revelations come 2 months after Kroes' former boss and previous European Commission President, José Manuel Barroso, took a job as chairman of Goldman Sachs, a move roundly criticized by EU lawmakers and the subject of an ongoing probe by authorities, prompting many to call for tighter restrictions on outgoing European officials.
What the Commission needs to do is say, are the kind of safeguards we have in place, are they good enough? Should the cooling off period for commissioners, ex-commissioners, which is now only 18 months, should that be extended?
With Brexit and the rise of nationalist parties across Europe, the EU is desperate to restore its flagging reputation. This latest controversy comes as yet another blow to the bloc.
But for more on this story, let's cross to reporter Marco Oved, who's been following the Panama Papers and the trove of data coming out of tax havens for newspaper The Toronto Star. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24.
Thank you for having me, Francois.
Neelie Kroes first denied chairing that offshore firm, then said it's a mistake to have listed her as its director. Factually speaking, what has she done wrong?
Well, what happened, I guess, whenever we find public figures in these databases, the first thing we're to do is to check and see if they've already publicly disclosed. So as an EU commissioner, she was required to file annual declarations of her private interests. If she had business interests, if she had investments, if she sat on the board of directors of any charities or companies, and she didn't mention this. And so, of course, those public declarations are in order to make sure that we avoid conflicts of interest. And conflicts of interest aren't always actual material conflicts of interest. But if you read the legislation, the whole point of these declarations is to avoid the perception of conflict of interest. So in Neelie Kroes' case, you've got someone who's working on energy policy who's also invested in energy companies. That is whether or not she actually profited is not the point. The point is that she had a perception of conflict of interest.
Perception of conflict of interest. This firm of hers, Mint Holdings Limited, was looking to pick up assets from that failed U.S. energy giant Enron. All the while, she, at the Commission, had been pushing for a liberalization of the energy sector.
Well, I mean, that I guess underlines this perception issue. But I think part of the problem whenever you're dealing with tax havens is it's very difficult to understand just to what extent people are actually involved in these companies because there's just no transparency. So in Europe, in Britain, in North America, you have overt public corporate registries. Anyone can go in, find out the public documents that have been filed by these companies. You know who are their shareholders, who are their directors. But in tax havens, like the Bahamas, these registries aren't public. And so what ends up happening are these sort of hidden directorships. And it's quite hard to prove anything, even with the leak that we have. And that's because all we know is her name was on this secret registry that wasn't available to the public. We don't know if she was a figurehead director. She simply might have been signing documents and had no financial interest in the company. But it's impossible to know because of the sort of opacity and the lack of transparency in tax havens. And so, we've been working on the Panama Papers for a year now. And, when you speak to financial experts around the world and tax experts around the world, one of the biggest problems with tax havens is not their tax policy. Any country can decide whether to charge tax or not to charge tax. The problem is transparency. And when you allow people to do business behind closed doors without having to put their name on public documents, then you get all sorts of nefarious activity. You get perceptions of conflict of interest. You get crime, money laundering, and terrorism financing.
So there's tax havens and tax havens. What is the particular allure of the Bahamas?
Well, the interesting thing about the Bahamas is that when we got this leak, it's a little bit different than the Panama Papers leak. So this leak is much less detailed. In the Panama Papers leak, we had internal documents from a law firm that incorporated companies. So we got to see the correspondence between the law firm and its clients, where they discussed what kind of business was going on. We got to see money transfers. We got to see tax declarations. This leak is much less detailed, and so unfortunately, we're not able to know exactly what's going on behind the companies. All it is a copy of the corporate registry that isn't normally made public. And so the ICIJ, which is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, they're overseeing the entire worldwide collaboration, and they've put this database online, kind of setting the example, saying this is what all tax havens should be doing, which is putting basic information online about all the companies that are registered there.
Both with the Panama Papers and the Panama leaks, it's an anonymous source who gave over the documents to German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. Did I hear you say, Marco, that you're still working on those documents and that we may have yet more surprises?
Well, with such a massive leak, I mean, I'm not sure if you remember, but there were 11.5 million documents in the Panama Papers leak. By comparison, this one is less than 500,000 documents. So we were able to go through it relatively quickly. And in the Panama Papers, because it was so much richer, involved tax declarations and email traffic, that you can really go down that rabbit hole and follow companies and try and figure out what they're up to and where the money is moving. And so, in fact, we only did a real superficial thing the first time around, where we found the most prominent names around the world, the politicians, the big companies, and tried to focus on them. In the last 6 months, since the Panama Papers first came out, we've been able to sort of do that second look and look at the other things that we had put aside the first time because we didn't have time to look into them. And so we've got a whole bunch of new stuff coming out in the next few months. And, I come from Canada, so our team here is focusing on Canadian companies, but you start realizing their links are all over the world. So we've got Canadian mining companies operating in Latin America. We've got mining companies, energy companies in Africa, and the links are all over the place. And just, I guess, to sort of always make this distinction is what we've often heard since the beginning of the Panama Papers is that this isn't illegal. And that's not the point. I think that the governments around the world have done a really good job of cracking down on money laundering and terrorism financing. What they haven't done a good job at is recuperating lost tax revenue. And this is where you have creative lawyers finding loopholes in laws and ways to move money into tax havens that is technically legal, but the result is that we've got billions and billions of dollars that aren't getting paid in taxes. And of course, that filters down to the regular level. These are transit projects that aren't getting built, bridges that aren't being repaired.
But very briefly, because these revelations about Neelie Kroes of the Netherlands, it's a double whammy here in Europe after those on José Manuel Barroso, the former president of the European Commission who took a job at Goldman Sachs, conflict of interest allegations abounding. Where you are in Canada, do you get the sense that when you think about it, the Panama Papers, all of this, it's impacting seriously the credibility of politicians as a whole?
Well, whenever you see politicians with one hand saying we're going to crack down on tax cheats, and then you present them with a document showing that they themselves have been using a tax haven, it's very hard for them to reconcile those two things. And I think it leads to a lot of cynicism. How can you believe politicians when they're clearly, double dealing in that way? And I think that maybe to bring it right back quickly to the Bahamas is that they will tell you we're compliant with all the rules around the world. But when you really look at the Bahamas, they have been avoiding and dragging their heels and doing everything possible to ever actually participate in any kind of cooperation and protect their clients. And that's what's been going on until now.
Marco Chown of the Toronto Star, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Francois.